Of work and personal life, Olivia often sees the intersection of mental health, blackness, and the social determinants of health, as well as stigma. And today she's here to share her story to help others heal while demystifying myths about mental health in the Black, African, and Caribbean communities. She firmly believes in healing begins with a dialogue. So, Olivia, let us begin with a dialogue. Welcome, Olivia. How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm very excited about this hour together. Can I start by asking you, is there a quote, a proverb, or the works of an influential person that guides you in your work or gives you inspiration?
Actually, yes, there is, or there's quite a few, but I had to zero down on one. This is someone that we all know. We have watched him on TED Talks, and it's none other than Dr. Gabor Mate. And honestly, he's just so thought-provoking. And I remember in a TED Talk I watched years ago, he said, and I'm reading it right here, the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. And I feel like that really resonated with me since hearing that years ago, because often now we see the tip of the iceberg when it comes to a person, but not really like the layers or like really what's underneath the tip. So I feel like when it comes to working in the field, don't just see people, no, on the surface, but really what's underneath. What are those layers we got to peel back?
Absolutely. And I think that speaks so well to stigma as well, right? We only see kind of what has been the accumulation of everything that they went through, and we make snap judgments based on that, not really thinking to what must have happened to that person or what that person must have been through. Thank you so much. Can you tell our listeners, start by letting us know what is the current state of mental health in the Black, African, and Caribbean community?
Yeah, no, I think this is a really great question. I will say that we have come a long way, a very long way, but we still have a way to go. I believe that learning is a lifelong journey, also challenging myths and stereotypes, lifelong journey. But I will say that we have made progress with even just in Toronto or the GTA, having these organizations that are very Black serving, Black focused, Black led, that really create spaces and dialogue for people to talk about mental health and some of the challenges that they're facing, whether individually or in the community. I even recently, I've been following this group on Instagram. I think it's called Galavant, and it's really by a registered social worker named Monique Christie or Monique Pitt, and she's really creating a safe space for women of color, especially Black women, to talk about mental health, but to also engage in activities that are not typically deemed as therapy, right? But that they are therapeutic. So I feel like we are definitely doing a lot of reclaiming, resurgence, resistance when it comes to mental health and also healing. But I will say we do have much progress to make, but we are definitely there. And should be told, the trauma is not our responsibility. The trauma that has been inflicted on us generationally in the community, systemically, it's not our fault. But we are definitely picking up the mantle and running with it, and we're doing a great job.
No, that's awesome. What are some of the myths that currently exist within the Black community about mental health?
Oh, okay. we can, I don't know where to start, but we're gonna start somewhere. I will say that especially in like the African Caribbean community, and listen guys, I am from the Caribbean community, so I'm gonna speak. When it comes to mental health, um, it's something that we don't talk about. We don't want to talk about it. That's not us. That's a white person thing. Though that's only for white people. And truth be told, we also experience mental health, and sometimes at an even higher rate. And I will say too, even just the labeling of Black folks when it comes to mental health. When we see a person of color, we're quick to call them a madman or a mad person, especially in the Caribbean community. We call them mad. Also, too, we call them bad mind, all these labels. And I will say also, as well as when it comes to even Black women, often not, we get the strong Black woman trope, right? Oh, you're so strong. Like, you can take that. And truth be told, like, yes, we are resilient, but resilience doesn't mean we don't go through, right? And resilience shouldn't be used to kind of cover the trauma that we endure. So I would say, in all honesty, it can be very dismissive. Sometimes we are mislabeled or wrongfully labeled. And really and truly, we go through mental health at a high rate as well. The suicide rates have increased, even just anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, psychosis. And it's really just an intersection of things: community violence, social determinants of health. It can be even just witnessing abuse, witnessing trauma, but we obviously need those spaces to talk about it. So definitely a lot of stereotypes and stigma, but I know that we're actively working on it.
Yes. I want to ask you, women, and in the context of this conversation, I'll say Black women, we tend to carry the weight of the universe on our shoulders. That how does that impact our journey through mental health and our experience of mental health?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I would say, growing up, I feel like it's been instilled into us. Like, we also heard a quote, you got to work twice as hard to get half as far as your counterparts. That's your male counterparts and your other white or racialized counterparts. And I feel like we have been conditioned of we got to work hard, we got to hustle and bustle to show that we're productive and we're also contributing to society. And I feel like that carries such a heavy weight on our shoulders. And I feel like when it comes to mental health, again, there's never time to talk about it. We're not given those spaces or time to really kind of decompress and say, you know what, I'm carrying a lot on my plate. And also too, we're often told that we got to be strong or you're so strong, keep going. But in all honesty, I remember I had a colleague say this to a group of us at work. We parade around Black excellence, but my colleague said Black excellence is also rest. And I'm like, oh, okay. I never thought about it that way because, again, we're conditioned of you got to be productive and you got to be productive to show results and show that you're worthy of being at the table. But my colleague is like, no, like Black excellence is also rest. Like you got to recharge and rejuvenate yourself. And I was like, okay. And I think that's something that we fail to do in our community is rest because then we're going to be deemed as lazy, not productive, not contributing. We're not goal oriented, but rest is just as impactful and effective.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you, Olivia. Um, can you tell our listeners about your own connection, your own journey through mental health?
Yeah. Ooh, it's definitely a connection on a personal level and a professional level. Um, I will say that growing up, I was raised by a single mom. My mom raising myself and my two sisters. And I've really watched her navigate so many systems, navigate the education system because she had to advocate for her girls to get quality education. I've watched her use food banks. I've watched her struggle with making ends meet. Even to we were growing up in a community where there was a lot of talent, but not a lot of resources. And it was constantly underfunded. Right now, the community that we once lived in is not recognizable. Like, and that's Eglinton West. Like, you cannot recognize it without a construction. the urban renewal, the revitalization. Like there was a lot that happened in that community. Even gun violence happened, and I feel like that really has stuck with me growing up. I was like, okay, like I said to myself that if I make it, then I'm gonna help others make it. And I said that my life mission and purpose has to be bigger than me. It can't be about me. It can't be about accolades. It has to be about strengthening and empowering my community. And it has to be about amplifying the voices that are often dismissed and silenced, right? And also, to, I would say, professionally, mental health. I would say I've been working in the mental health and addictions field. It was always tied to young people. If it's not youth and education, if it's not youth and mentorship, youth and employment, it was youth and mental health. And I find that they're not two mutually exclusive things. Young people need a space to feel heard. Young people need a space for someone to listen to them, hear them out, especially Black youth. And I feel like often not in the school system, they're deemed as rebellious, deemed as they're out of order, they need to be in line, they need to be checked. And then even to how the school system response to them is suspending them, expelling them, harsh sanctions. It's never about how do we take the time to understand why they're behaving that way. And I think that goes back to the quote I said earlier by Dr. Gabor Mate saying, the question is why the addiction, but not the why the pain. Similarly with young Black youth, it's not why the behavior, but why the pain, and where does that come from? So I feel like when working with Black youth, professionally, mentorship, personally, it's always understanding the why to their behaviors and thoughts.
Would you be willing to share a little bit about your own childhood? You told us about your
Yeah.
single mother upbringing, two sisters, only girls in the household. What was it like for you?
Yeah, oh my goodness. It was, again, mental health. We don't talk about those things. We don't talk about those things. But I feel like watching my mother really struggle, not ask for help, because again, in the community, we're taught don't ask for help, figure it out, get your stuff together, don't seek support. And I've watched my mom do that, and that's no shame to her, right? Because she did the best with what she had. Like that was her in survival mode. And I feel like even too, she never had a space to talk about how it impacted her being a single parent, living in a community with gun violence, um, accessing food from food banks. She never talked about those things. I even watched my mom work two, three jobs to make ends meet, to pay bills, even though sometimes it still wasn't enough. And I feel like that impacted me in terms of kind of internalizing those things, like watching my mom struggle and watching my family struggle. And I would say that today, it's funny enough, I don't talk about it often, but I am someone with anxiety. I remember my doctor had a conversation with me, the very first conversation with me a few years ago. And she's a woman of color, not Black, but she's from the South Asian community. And when she's like, Olivia, I don't know how to break it down to you, but like I'm just observing, I'm assessing you. I think you have anxiety. Oh, the way I flipped. I flipped and I was like, you are not talking to me, wrong person. We don't deal with those things. But as time progressed and I saw my own behavior, saw the way even I would see life and interact with folks, I was like, okay, maybe she was onto something. And I know when I was speaking to my family about it, they're like, anxiety? You? No way. And they couldn't connect that because I was high performing, always productive, always involved, always doing good in the community. But like being high performing and productive, but also too struggling with mental health can coexist. And I feel like that was kind of like a dialogue, that was created because of my family doctor and her advocacy. I was able to kind of have that conversation with my family. Like, I witnessed a lot as a child. I witnessed you guys struggling. I internalized that. I saw a lot in the community. And I feel like today, they're more receptive. They're more receptive. Do they understand 100%? No. They're still like, but at the same time, they're more open than they were before. So I would say just even life's journey, even I would say grief. Grief is something that in the community, we're just like, okay, we might shed a tear and then move on. But I've experienced grief also throughout my years, and more so recently. Last year, I lost my father. So I was just like, sometimes we're always told, like, okay, you got to go at it again, get back on your feet, you cried enough. But I feel like grief is something we don't actually sit with. And that's actually a very complex emotion. So I would definitely say it's ebbs and flows with my mental health. But I shared that because, again, healing begins with a dialogue. And we need those safe spaces to have those dialogues.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about how your own experience intersects with religion?
Yes, I do identify as a Christian. Um, and then people are like, okay, if you're a Christian, why do you have anxiety? And I'm just like, well, actually, being a Christian and mental health, again, are not mutually exclusive. Again, can coexist. They can abide within the same body, my body. So I will say that, typically, especially in Black churches, it's if you got mental health, you need to be prayed for, you need to be delivered. But I'm definitely having those conversations with leaders, with people in my community, spiritual mentors, and saying it's not even that. It's people literally go through real life experiences, assaults, trauma, um, adverse childhood experiences that have really shaped their experience and their journey. And we need to have the conversation and not just write it off as they're possessed. It's people go through real life things, and it's we can't take that away. And also too, when it comes to trauma, I think it was an actress named Niecy Nash, when she was in the that documentary, When They See Us, when they did an after interview, she's like, we cannot tell people how to process their trauma, especially when it comes to the surface. We can't sweep that under the rug. And I feel like very similarly in the community, we can't tell people how to process their trauma and say, well, they need to be prayed for, they need to drink tea, they need to be delivered. It's deeper than that, and especially when it was a traumatic experience that really altered their childhood, altered their way of thinking, and even their behaviors. And even too, I'm doing a lot of research and I'm realizing that, faith is actually a protective factor. A lot of people don't see that, but faith and spirituality can be protective factors. Do they eradicate or do they, fix mental health? No. But what it does is it can serve as a buffer. So really having those conversations that it doesn't negate the experience, but it can help heal. So yeah.
Thank you. Um, you spoke to it a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you're currently doing?
Yes. So I work as a mental health, or actually a navigator, working with young people across the GTA, youth and their caregivers, looking for mental health and addiction supports. So some people say different names. People call us like doulas. People have called us like the middleman, but we're navigators, and really navigators is to get them connected to those resources and services. So it can be anything to groups, individual counseling, psychiatry, alternative school options like a day treatment school. It can be even, I want to say, caregiver groups, because it's one thing to address the mental health of a young person, but also what about the parent? Sometimes parents struggle with language, techniques, tools of how to help when it comes to their mental health. So they also need support with how to navigate the system, how to support a loved one who's struggling. So finding supports for parents as well. And really, it's a free resource. It's with Sunnybrook. It's called the Family Navigation Project. It's a free resource. People do not pay for navigation, and we help them find services whether in the private or the public sector.
Okay. I know that you said that your work has always involved youth. What do you think has driven you to work with this population? What does it bring to your life?
Yeah, I The thing is, okay, other than young people keeping you young and keeping you in check, because listen, no one tells the truth more than a young person. They'll tell you like how it is. They'll be like, okay, you're not being genuine. Okay, this is what's wrong. They will set it straight. Other than that, I feel like again with my lived experience, I wish there were spaces for me to be heard, to be seen, to be validated, for my family to be validated, my family to be heard. I wish I had someone to advocate for me. I mean, I had my mom. My mom was a great advocate especially when it came to the education system. And I said that again with my lived experience, I want to help, young people feel like they have someone in their corner, someone who can amplify their voice, someone who sees the value in their voice, someone who can just, again, create safety and space for them. Sometimes young people just need an advocate, need a mentor. And I said, I definitely want to be that because I was yearning for that as a young person. So, absolutely. So that's why I took on the call. I believe that us doing this work, it's a calling. It's definitely a calling because um, it comes with a lot of weight, sometimes tears, sometimes you feel like you want to give in and give up. So I said, okay, I'm answering the call of, serving and working with young people.
I love how you put that. And, I want to ask the question, when you have such a passion and a drive, and it comes from both like a personal level as well, where you want to support these youth, specifically Black youth, in terms of navigating the system, how do you how do you manage the system? Like sometimes the system is inadequate or doesn't have adequate supports for youth, and this is what you're working within. So
Yes.
how do you navigate that? How do you kind of make that negotiation?
Oh, that's a good question. Because sometimes I'm like, I'm just one person and this system is bigger and greater than me. But I also feel like there's power in numbers and there's power in connections. I feel like doing this work, you gotta liaise and work with others that have the same vision and values. Because when we come together and join our voices, our values, our visions, we're that much more powerful. Again, it's a system that has been set like this for decades, right? So I'm just like, okay, one person versus a system, especially in the position I'm in, I can't tackle it on my own. So I also have to rely on people who I would say are have more knowledge than me, more years of experience. I also call them elders. So those in the community who have been doing this work long before I have. And I feel like too, people often forget about the leaders in the community. They may not be like employed with like an agency. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but they've been doing this for so long, advocacy, being on the front line. So I would say that when it comes to navigating the system, it's definitely working with those who've been doing the work and those who know the community much better than I do, because it's one thing to go in a community and act like an expert when you're not. And I think it's so important to place those on the front line and center who are the experts. And those are typically the community leaders. Those are typically residents in the neighborhoods who have lived experiences. Those are the people that I try to work with because they know what to do and how to do it, and they do it very well.
There's two things I'm hearing from that. I'm hearing the saying that it takes a community to raise a child.
Yes.
And I'm also hearing nothing for us without us.
Yes, that's one of my favorite proverbs. Yes, because really and truly, like, and research and science and the field of medicine have often, like, forgotten about the community. They've often used the community to study them, and then once they're done studying the community, that's it. But I really feel like to have effective research and results, we got to center those voices and center those experiences. So I really love that proverb because really it's not about me, it's about them, and we got to do it with them.
No, absolutely. Um, can you tell our listeners about adverse childhood experiences? I know that you mentioned the ACEs. What are these for those who don't know, and what impact does it have in terms of the health outcomes and wellness of individuals?
Yeah, so the ACEs is really things, really significant things that have happened in a person or community's childhood years. That could be anything physical, like physical abuse. It can be sexual abuse. It can be even emotional abuse. Sometimes we don't talk about that one. It can be neglect. It can be isolation. Even to it can be you witness a relative get incarcerated, right? Or the justice system failed them. It can be death. It can be someone who was diagnosed with a severe illness or condition, and that happened in your early childhood years at a very young age. And I would say how that impacts really our quality of life is that the more adverse experiences that occur in your childhood, it does increase, the negative outcomes when it comes to your life. And those negative outcomes, again, can be addiction, it can be mental health, it can be risky behaviors, especially risky sexual behaviors. It can be a variety of things. It can even be health outcomes as well. It can be so many things. It can be also to how successful you are in school or your job. So many outcomes. The list continues. Like I just really gave a very brief level of what ACEs are. And so I feel like when it comes to ACEs, it's really just understanding how we can support those who are very young. And that's why I love working with young people because a lot of times these experiences happen in their childhood. Sometimes when you speak with a person, you sit down with them and you're like, okay, tell me about your journey. Really, the very first significant thing happened in their childhood years and it wasn't addressed or they didn't get the support that they needed. And so I feel like when working with young people, it really starts at a young age to really kind of tackle the things that are happening.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. I'm recognizing that it's 28 minutes after the hour, and I know that we're going to pause for a short break. Before we get you into a new question, I'm thinking that this might be an appropriate time to take a break and we can come back. All right. So, audience, we will see you just shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and welcome back. If we have an audience, please start getting your questions together so that we can ask them of Olivia near the ending of our time. Where we left off, Olivia had let us know about ACEs and kind of what impact it has on a person over their lifespan. Um, Olivia, can I ask, what do you understand to be the experience of many Black youth within the school system?
Thank you for sharing. I would say for Black youth, and I actually did a research paper about this when I was at York University for my master's thesis. It was titled From Surviving to Thriving, reflecting on the educational resilience of Black students. And it was really a narrative study looking in retrospect of university students who went to high school in Toronto and what it was like for them. And in terms of their experience in the education system, they often felt, stereotyped. Stereotyped in a sense of Black youth are often pushed to do athletics and sports, but never like challenged to grow in the field of like STEM, social sciences, like different fields. Also, too, as I mentioned earlier, like harsh sanctions like suspension, expulsion, really just kind of called the school to prison pipeline. I think that is the theory where it's like the more we push Black youth out, the more likely they're going to end up in the justice system, right? And so I see that. And even growing up in, Toronto, going to high school, I often saw that, like my peers suspended within like seconds like that, expelled like that. And really and truly, that doesn't address what is going on. Like, as I said, we look at the tip of the iceberg for a person, but not the layers or what's underneath. And so when it comes to a Black youth, if say, their behaviors are not quote unquote in alignment with rules, why are we quick to suspend them or expel them? Why not even pull them aside and be like, I've been noticing this. Tell me what's going on. Because often not, they might be acting out because of a situation that's happening in their community, happening at home.
Yes.
Maybe with mental health, they haven't gone into counseling, right? Again, it goes back to the piece of we don't talk about those things. And so I feel like and I say we because it includes me as a professional, need to do better in, taking care of Black youth, especially in the education system.
Yes. I'd love to ask you, like I've heard, I apologize, and please correct me if my wording is off, but Black youth tend to be kind of adultified differently than white youth in the sense that oftentimes Black boys at the age of 10, I think I read, are seen as, full grown Black men and treated as such.
Hmm.
And oftentimes Black girls are sexualized very early.
Hmm.
What's your experience with, that adultification of Black youth?
Yeah, I feel like I don't agree with it. And I feel like, again, it dismisses, you know, their youthfulness. It dismisses their experience. It really puts
Yes.
this label on them that like it forces them to grow up faster than they really should, and I feel like it doesn't give them the privilege of being a child and having that experience as a young person. I would say too, even sexualizing young Black girls, and often not, let's be honest, it has to do with their body. It has to do with their body. And really and truly, we're not looking at the behavior, we're not looking at the mindset, we're not looking at their maturity level, but we're actually looking at their body, the physicality of it. And I don't agree with it. In terms of young Black boys, again, it goes back to the piece of why are they doing that? Because often not, young Black boys may have to grow up faster than their counterparts. Maybe they are the only male in the family. Maybe they're the man of the house, or they're the only male in the house, and that kind of forced them to grow up in a certain way. And I feel like even if that's the case, we should still honor them as like a young person and giving them that honor. So I really believe that it happens so often, but there's layers as to why, even to sexualizing young Black girls, and then we're going to put the label on them that they're promiscuous. Really and truly, why we're not looking at the layers of why are we sexualizing them. So I feel like really and truly, these are ongoing conversations, and not to just look at the body of a young person, but understanding the root of it. So their maturity level, understanding their behaviors, their thoughts.
Yes. Thank you. Um, and I know that you're involved with the Black Achievers program, and I believe that's through the YMCA. Can you tell us what that is and what it involves?
Yes, I've been doing this for the last 3 years. And one thing about me is I love volunteering, I love mentoring. I just like getting my hands involved in the community. And so the Black Achievers program actually started in the States. So I believe in Kentucky. And so it was actually adopted here in Toronto a few years ago. And so it's really about mentors, Black mentors are paired up with Black youth. Sometimes it's one on one, sometimes it's one mentor to a group of Black youth based off of similar interests, career aspirations, educational background, all that stuff. And so, really, it's about you connect with your mentees every week and facilitating workshops or even sessions about different things. So, it can be about effective communication, it can be about employment skills, it can be about post secondary education, like how do you go through like that OUAC portal and upload stuff, choosing courses. It can be about friendships, healthy relationships, consent, different things. And it's really from like a culturally relevant perspective. Even to, we do things when it comes to Black History Month. We do things when it comes to Black Mental Health Week, the first week of March. We also try to do things that affirm their Blackness because, again, when they go in spaces, whether it's the school system, just different systems, they often don't feel like they belong. They feel like they're outcasted. They feel like they're downcasted. They feel like they're outsiders. So, really, this program is about creating a space for them where their identities are affirmed, but also promoting the social, economic, and academic advancement of Black youth, especially Black youth who are high school students. So, from grades 9 to 12.
Yes. Yes. I really see it kind of is a way to, like, from a grassroots level, address kind of this gap that exists within the Black community, especially around like mentorship and good information, pursuing careers, and just having somebody that they can trust, a trusted adult.
Yes? Yeah.
Thank you. Um, what are some strengths that you've seen within your work with Black youth?
Oh, my strengths. Oh, my goodness. You know what? I will say working with Black youth, the strength of it is that they teach you. Like often you feel like you're teaching them. You feel like you're doing the sessions, you're facilitating, but I feel like they are the ones that teach you. They teach you the most up-to-date things that's happening in the community, that's happening around the world. They'll be like, "Oh my gosh, Olivia, did you hear about this happening?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't." "Oh, did you hear about this policy or bill?" And I'm like, "No, like tell me more." And I think that is such a strength of them that is not often highlighted. They are the ones who are the teachers. And really and truly, we are the students. And really and truly, they are the future for tomorrow. And I would say they're so creative, so innovative. They have so much within them. And again, it's just a space to really hone into their gifts and their talents. And I would say the strength of doing that is just relationship building and also gaining the trust. Sometimes we're working with Black youth, both at the YMCA Black Achievers Program, but also to my profession, working with Black youth. Sometimes it's a distrust they have with the system. And sometimes when they see you as a professional, they see you as a part of the system. They're like, okay, here goes another person. They're not going to do anything different this time around. And really and truly, I think the gift of working with them is really just relationship building and gaining their trust. I feel like that's where it starts. Yes, we can get into the resource sharing, treatment recommendations, coaching, mentoring, but I feel like the very beginning of it is trust building. And I feel like that's the gift that we appreciate the most.
Yes, I love that. In your experience, within your work with Black youth, is there any ways that mental health symptoms present differently?
Yes, we often hear and see this. Like, I've heard people say, "Oh, that young person has an attitude. Oh, their attitude's so nasty." And truth be told, it's they might have an attitude, but it's really their type of avoidance. They have a type of avoidance they're displaying. And sometimes I actually have a close friend of mine, and she's like, yeah, people say I have a bad attitude. She's like, but I really have social anxiety. So sometimes, if you see them, they might, make their face a certain way. People might say, oh, they're cutting their eyes at me. They're, screwing up their face. Really and truly, it's sometimes mental health, and it may not always look like your typical DSM model book theory symptom of mental health, but also we have to take into consideration like the ethnocultural aspects of it. We might exhibit mental health differently. Even too, I work with clients, and I've actually heard that there is a disorder called this social pragmatic communication disorder. And I'm like, oh, and I spoke with a parent. I'm like, tell me more about that. And the parent's like, literally, my child looks unhappy. Like her face is always angry, but that's her diagnosis. Like the parents like, oh, she looks angry all the time. She looks unapproachable, but it's far from that. It's just because the social communication disorder piece, like it presents itself in a way that looks like no one should come up to her. And I feel like when it comes
Yes.
to mental health and Black people, we have to take into consideration that it's not a one band aid fits all solution. It's not a one universal definition of it. It looks differently and exhibits differently in everyone because of our body, even the language that we have access to. Some people are good with words, other people may not always be confident or good with their words. It doesn't mean they're not also experiencing mental health. And sometimes we label it as they're being rude, they're ignoring me, they have no manners. And really and truly, it's not that. Some people may not have language or words to communicate effectively of what they're feeling and how they're feeling.
Thank you very much for that. Um, Olivia, what has been, you think, most surprising for you in this work?
Um, what has been the most surprising for me? That's a really good question. I feel like it's not a surprise, but I feel like it's reaffirming that culturally relevant supports matter. They matter so much. Um, Often now when I'm working with, racialized families, whether from South Asian, East Asian, um, Black, African, Caribbean, majority of them say it would be nice to have a therapist that looks like me. And it's not a surprise, but it's just really affirming like how important it is to have culturally relevant supports to ensure effective care, client-centered care. And so, even too, I've worked with families who are like, it would be nice to have a therapist that spoke Mandarin. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you want a therapist that speaks Mandarin, okay? And the need is there, but what's
Yes.
shocking is that there's not a lot of resources out there that are culturally relevant. We are making progress, but there's not a lot. And if there is some out there, it's not always accessible to everyone. And I think that's the shock for me where the need is here, but the accessibility is kind of like here and it doesn't really align. And I'm just like, okay, like, how can we remove the barriers so our families, our young people, our clients, patients, participants, whatever language we use, how can they get the best care? Because the needs are there. Every time I speak with them at work, outside of work, they're like, it'd be nice if someone looked like me. And then when I look, and I'm like, okay, the amount of need to what's there, it's not aligning. So I feel like
Yes.
we definitely need to increase accessibility. And sometimes accessibility can be location. You know, there's a really good therapist for this person, but how close are they? Are they doing virtual?
Yes.
Are they not doing virtual? Also, too, it can be going back to accessibility. Okay, what if we were working with someone who's Black but visually impaired? do we have accessibility within that clinic or practice? So again, the needs are high, but the accessibility, the availability is it doesn't always match up. And I think that's
Right.
what's concerning, but also shocking for me.
Definitely. Definitely. And I'd love to come back to that kind of near the end. Um, but I want to ask the question, like I can see the passion that you have towards the work that you're doing.
Oh,
Like there's some questions that I ask you and your face lights up because you're
oh,
so excited to answer it. So I can definitely see that passion. Being so personally connected to this work, how do you maintain your own personal balance and self-care?
oh my self-care. Ooh, that's the word that I feel like I'm actively working on it. It's so funny. I don't practice what I preach half the time, and I'm like, okay, Olivia, you got to take a step back and do what you need to do. But for me, I think self-care, it looks so differently every single time. Because self-care can be individual for me, and individual can be prayer. It can be, writing in my book, or going to the gym, or dancing and listening to like cultural music or spiritual music. But self-care, and I think it was, oh my goodness, I think Audrey, yes, or Audre Lorde talked about self-care can also be collective and radical. And so sometimes it looks like spending time in the community, volunteering, maybe like volunteering at a food bank, which I do every now and then. It can be, going to a, black centered event, or just something that kind of reaffirms who I am as a black professional, but also fuels me and fills up my cup so I'm ready for the week to pour back into others. So it varies. Self care can be individual and collective for me, but I always include the component of reaffirming of who I am as a black woman, as a black professional, working in the field, but also serving and working with others. And I think that's so important because, again, when you're working with a gang's force systems, sometimes it can really, put a weight on your shoulders. And you sometimes feel small about yourself, like, oh my goodness, like I can't do it. And I feel like that self-care is so important to replenish yourself, so you can take on the next day, the next week, the next case that is assigned to you. So self-care is needed. Working on it though.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful answer, and thank you. Um, do you have any words for people who are listening right now and your story resonates with them, or they're going through their own kind of mental health struggle? What might you have to say to them?
Oh, absolutely. I would say first and foremost, when I'm working with families and clients, they're very hard on themselves. They're like, I'm not seeing progress and I've been going to counseling for months. What's wrong with me? I failed. And I want to say that progress is not linear. It's not linear. Healing is not linear. Sometimes there's ebbs and flows. Sometimes you feel like you're making good progress and good ground, and then other times you feel like you're regressing. But I feel like very similar to an infant or a toddler. How does an infant or a toddler begin to walk? It's not like, oh, they bounce up and they're running. It's sometimes they stagger. Sometimes they might trip a little bit, they lose their balance, but it's always that consistency and determination of getting back up. And I just want to let people know, if you're struggling with your mental health or addiction or substance use, whatever it may be, they continue to do what you're doing. Again, it's not the same time we plant seeds that we see the harvest or we see the garden bloom. It's really that consistency of getting back up even when you feel like you're faltering and it's not working. Like, continue to do it, because eventually you will see your breakthrough, you will see the outcomes and results, and you'll be able to look back and said, man, I'm glad I didn't give up. So I want to say, keep going, and remember, whatever you do, like, keep doing it. Know that you have purpose. Sometimes you feel like, okay, what's my purpose? And sometimes it's not always revealed to you within that moment, or sometimes you don't see it. But know that, like, you have a purpose, and honestly, like your story will help someone else. It will help you, but also help someone else. So those are just my gems for anyone listening in.
Beautiful. I love that. There is a question in the chat. Um, Kayla asks, how can we get more racialized, specifically Black people and Black men, into working in mental health?
That's a really good question. Thanks, Kayla. I will say, first and foremost, I would say maybe from a top up approach, the top up, they need to diversify the workplace. That is one. That is one thing. Um, we know there are people, we're starting to see it now. People are having this interest for mental health and addiction. But from the top up, the systemic level, there is the need to diversify the workforce. Because really and truly, research has shown representation is not just symbolism. It shows that it's effective for client-centered care. So top number one is diversifying the workforce. Number two, I would say again, not everyone may be ready to talk about mental health because again, mental health can be very touchy for people for different reasons. Some people may not have processed or worked through their mental health. Sometimes they're actively working on it. Other times it might be again the cultural piece where we don't talk about those things, or oh man, like it's not a big deal. But I would say that the more people have these conversations, I think it would definitely ignite some interest and some passion. So I would say we got to continue having these conversations, and hopefully that will prompt people to want to get their hands involved or get themselves involved in working in the field of mental health and addiction. And I would say too, if you have a passion and you feel like, okay, maybe I'm not skilled enough, because let's be honest, we have this quote unquote, this imposter syndrome. And that's a whole other topic. People are like, oh, a lot of racialized people have imposter syndrome. And it's not just imposter syndrome, we're dealing with the effects of racism. And that's why we internalize it. But that's a whole other topic. But we have to also believe that we're capable of doing this work. We have the knowledge, we have the insight, we have the lived experience, we have the tools, and I think it comes down to believing that we can do it and create impact, which will in turn create change. So I would say definitely kind of betting on ourselves to do this work. And also reclaiming spaces, reclaiming our stories, creating our own spaces. I think that's important too.
Love it. I love that. Um, Speaking of, working in the field, what message might you have for listeners who are working in a field that supports Black people who are living with mental health and substance use concerns?
Yes, I would say definitely listen to them. Again, I said earlier, it's not a one band-aid solution. And even too historically, let's look at medicine, let's look at science. It wasn't always respecting the black body or the black person. So when a psychiatrist, for example, meets with a black person, don't just use, yes, use your tools, but also take into consideration the cultural pieces, take into consideration their lived experiences, the language, all those stuff when it comes to working with a black person. And also to, I would say, making them take the lead. I said it earlier, it's important to center the voices of those who've been doing the work, those with the lived experiences. I really think that when it comes to serving them, make them take the lead. When it comes to resource recommendations, um, I make sure, yes, I might come with my resources, but I also create room for families to say, okay, do you have feedback for me? Or what are your thoughts? Or I would love to hear how you feel about these resources. What makes sense for you? I feel like when we include young people, families, caregivers in those conversations, I feel like it helps to really shape and inform effective client centered care, but also effective treatment and healing. So, including them in the conversation, making them take lead, I think it's important.
Beautiful. And, I'm even asking for myself at this point. For those of us who are raising Black children, kind of what role do we have? I always struggle with wanting to protect my children as well as wanting differentiate. There's this idea of safe people. Are
Hmm.
police safe people? Are teachers safe people? Because we know those tropes that exist, and
Yeah.
sometimes our children are misled. So what's the role of a parent in terms of helping our children navigate this system and be able to grow up and be successful, whatever that means, but be whole as a person.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Oh my goodness. I would say children are not too young to have those conversations. I feel like, for example, growing up, I will be honest, my mom would avoid certain conversations with me. She felt like if I don't speak to her about these things, she'll be safe. And I feel like we're actually doing more harm than good. I feel like because if we do fall into the pit, how will we know to get out of the pit if you don't tell us? How will we know how to look at signs of possible danger or signs of things that might come to hurt us? And I feel like um, caregivers, parents, guardians, leaders, mentors have those honest conversations with young people. Don't withhold those conversations because they deserve to know, the reality, especially if they are black. Like, if I am black walking through or going through the education system, what will it be like for me? And everyone's experience is different. Again, people's experiences might be similar, but not identical. But really just tell them like the truth and the reality of what it might be like for them, also to who to reach out to, who are the people who might be safety nets, who could be a part of your safety plan. I feel like when we sweep things under the rug, it doesn't help, it just builds. And if we hide things in the dark, it just festers. So I feel like conversations are needed, and that's why I put in my bio, healing begins with a dialogue, because it really does. When we don't have those dialogues, then how can we heal? How can we keep our kids safe? How can we ensure their safety, ensure that they have access to rights and resources if we don't let them know the truth? So I would say definitely those conversations.
Awesome. We're coming close to an end. I know we kind of got on the topic of culturally relevant supports, and I do want to just mention to our listeners that Black Mental Health Canada does have a listing of Black practitioners. However, Olivia, is there any resources that you might want to share with our audience listening?
Oh, absolutely. Because again, working in the field, we're always trying to find, free resources or even culturally relevant. And I would say, definitely one agency that does really good work is C Center for Young Black Professionals. I used to work there and I salute them all the time. So it's CEE, so C Center for Young Black Professionals, where they work with young people 18 and up, for career empowerment, skills training. They have social workers, and it's a lot of young people who've been not in school, not employed. Maybe they just came out of the justice system, often find themselves at sea, and it's like it gives them hope. So I would say definitely see, if you're a Black woman, I would say Galavant by Monique Pitt, where safe, fun spaces of healing you can definitely access. And then there's so many in the community, but I'll just stop there because honestly, Black Mental Health Canada, you are doing a great job, and thank you so much for all that you do and for really paying the way forward and paving it for other people. So thank you.
Aw, thank you. A huge thank you to Olivia for joining us today. And to our audience, everyone who's listening, thank you for taking part in the podcast once again. I wish everybody a wonderful rest of your week and continue to take care. Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you so much.
Thank you.